Hi everyone, my name is Aviad. I'm a developer at Oracle, and in this video we would like to demo you how we can interact with the Oracle Service Manager with both EBS Oracle system and the SAP Ariba portal. This is per your request to do RPA flows that manipulates both systems. So to do that, I've created a few APIs on our Oracle Service Manager that interacts with both systems. We have here two APIs that interact with the EBS system, one that gets all the invoices of specific vendor and one that gets the details for specific invoice. And then we have two other APIs that interact with the SAP Ariba portal, one that gets the purchase order for specific buyer and one that gets the lines for specific purchase order. All our APIs have the same envelope or very similar envelope. If I just open one of them, I see that all of them have some information of how to connect to the system and where to go to, but they also have the input parameters that we need to use for this API to get the information that we need. For example, for this API that interacts with the EBS, we have the credentials to log in and then the vendor name and the output parameters that will return from the system. The way that we actually interact for each system is different. With the EBS, with the Oracle EBS system, we would interact with our own technology that knows how to interact with the Oracle EBS system. For the SAP Ariba system, we used the APIs that they are providing for us to interact with the system. These are the APIs that are available for the SAP Ariba system, and we just use them and wrap them with our own services to interact with the Ariba system. And once we did that, we have everything working under the same envelopes, under the same way that we invoke services inside the Oracle Service Manager, which means that then we can use them and work with them inside applications that we are creating and invokes them, or RPA flows that can invoke these services and do any manipulation that we want. So let's see how we are using these services and how we are interacting with the system. Let's start with the services that works with the EBS system. So for this, I've created two services, like I've said, one for getting the invoices for specific vendor and one to get the specific invoice details. Just to show you how it looks on the EBS system, this is our EBS system, our test EBS system. So what I'm doing with the first service is I'm actually finding an invoice for specific customer. This is the customer, so I will simulate getting into this screen, putting the customer name, pressing the find, and getting these two invoices which are currently exist for this customer in our system. The second API will just drill into one of these invoices by the invoice number and will give me the invoice lines that are related to this invoice. So this is how it looks on the EBS. Let's see how we can get it in Oracle Service Manager. So I can just run it from here, and you can see the data returned from the API, but a nicer way to see it is to see it through an application. So I've created a very simple application in our visualizer, which will just invoke those API and will render the data so it will be easy to see. And we will start by logging into the EBS. This will also invoke an API which just does the authentication. And this page will be the page that will invoke the first API, the one that gets the invoices of specific vendor. And here we can see the input field, the vendor name. I just press here the load button. This will invoke the API that I've just showed you on the Oracle Service Manager. You can see here the data that we are sending for this API, the authentication data and the name of the vendor. And here we get back the lines or the invoices that exist for this vendor. For each invoice we see all the fields that are returned, and we just render them here on the application. And the second thing I will do is just to click on one of these invoices. I'll click on this invoice number 9999, and this will invoke another API which gets as an input the invoice number and will return me all the details for this invoice. This is all of the details of the invoice and the invoice lines, which are returned here as 2 lines. So we can see it here. And this just shows you that we can interact with the EBS system. And now let's move to the SAP Ariba system. For that, we just use our own user in the SAP Ariba. We don't have much information there, but we had at least one order that we can show you that we can access. So this is our user in the SAP Ariba system. This is the order that we have, and I'll show you that I can get this information from this portal. Here is the data for this purchase order, and it has also one line here. And in our application, I just go to the page that interacts with the SAP Ariba. I have here the ability to retrieve it by date range and to put here the customer ID that I'm looking for. So I'll just press the load button here. This will invoke the get POs API for the SAP Ariba. You can see here the parameters that we have just sent, and in the response we will get all the orders that are available for this customer. We only have one order, and I only took some of the fields that I can get from the SAP. These are not all the fields that I can get from here. There are many fields that are returned in the API. You can see here on the API documentation, let me show you, that this is the API that I've been using. There are many fields that can be returned through the API. I've just chosen a few to demo you the interaction. And once I will click here on the line, I will invoke the second API, which will get the lines for this specific PO. This is the PO number, and these are there is only one line in our system that is attached to this PO, so this line is returned. Again, I've only selected few of the fields that I can get. There are many fields that can be returned from the Ariba system. So basically that's it. Just to summarize, we just wanted to show you that we have the ability to interact with both systems in different techniques, but we can wrap them in the same way as Oracle Service Manager APIs, and then we can use these APIs to create applications or to create RPA flows and do any type of business manipulation that we want to do with this data, and then of course to update any of the systems. Thank you very much for your attention.